President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be waived.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I know we're on the Milcon appropriation bill, but I did not want to lose the opportunity to talk about a pressing issue before the country today, and that is how we will work to resolve the nation's obligations to its creditors and what the failure of doing that means to the nation and to each and every American. And so, Mr. President, I rise to ask a simple question of my Republican colleagues. When is an entitlement not an entitlement? Apparently, given the rhetoric and actions of some of our friends on the other side of the aisle, the answer would be that an entitlement is not an entitlement when it benefits an entitled class of wealthy Americans. In the Republicans' ideological haze that is swirling around Washington these days, it's only an entitlement when it goes to the middle-class families, to students, to seniors, to the disabled, to the downtrodden and the dispossessed. Those entitlements, according to the Republicans, should be on the chopping block. But entitlements to the wealthy can never be on the table, despite the fact that our current tax code allows the wealthiest 400 taxpayers in America to pay a smaller percentage of their income in taxes than the average New Jersey family. Less than the average New Jersey family. Mr. President, what Republicans will ultimately do, their goal in this debt negotiation is outlined in the House-passed budget that ends Medicare as we know it, the baseline of retirement security for our seniors, what was the retirement security of my mother in the twilight of her life as she struggled against Alzheimer's, after having worked a lifetime to help build a family and be part of contributing to a community. She would not have lived with the dignity that she deserved in the twilight of her life, but for Medicare as we know it. And it makes a middle-class life in America more expensive and less accessible. Now, it seems to me that our Republican friends, their policies would make sure that the richer get even more rich at the expense of the middle class. They think that the rich are entitled to all the tax loopholes they get, but seniors and the disabled, they don't really need the health benefits they're getting. And we call this leadership? Do they call it leadership to stand on ideology, send this nation into default? Default basically means being a deadbeat. I think average Americans understand what being a deadbeat is all about. We teach our children to meet their responsibilities. We say don't incur a debt, but if you incur that debt, meet your responsibility, pay it. But now we have leaders in this nation who say, let's have the nation be a deadbeat. And we would leave a senior citizen who lives, I know some of our friends here may not have an appreciation of this, but who lives month to month only on Social Security, standing hopelessly on the front porch, waiting for a check that may not come. We call that leadership? We call it leadership to risk increasing interest rates on mortgages when families are struggling to pay at the current rates, on student loans, on car payments, on credit cards that middle-class families can ill afford now. They call it leadership to risk leaving a wounded veteran without a benefit check, or active military men and women, their families, without a paycheck. They call it leadership to risk a spike in prices that increases the cost of groceries and gas and potentially costs a middle-class family in New Jersey an additional $1,500 in the short term. They call it leadership to risk an end to unemployment benefits to states, leaving those already struggling in this economy at risk of losing what little they have. They call it leadership to risk Medicaid payments to states for disabled seniors in nursing homes who have no other options. but amazingly allow a millionaire who owns a stable of racehorses a depreciation allowance on the tax code on those racehorses? That's an entitlement we shouldn't touch. That's leadership. Bottom line, it's estimated that about $125 billion worth of bills on average may have to be put off if we don't deal with meeting the nation's obligations. Mr. President, it's not leadership if the dollar plummets and America loses. It's not leadership if no one follows but the far right wing of the Republican Party. If we're going to balance the budget by limiting entitlements and subsidies and earmarks, perhaps we should begin with those entitlements in the tax code that benefit those who are the wealthiest in the country. Perhaps we should look at ending entitlements for rich oil companies who receive $2 billion a year. They receive in just 2 tax breaks that the code gives them $21 billion over the next 10 years. And yet, oh no, we can't touch that, but we can tell some senior that, in fact, they have to be on the chopping block, that Medicare has to end as we know it. Or how about $6 billion for ethanol producers? Or how about the racehorse depreciation allowance? Or the billions year after year that defense contractors think they're entitled to? How about investing in new bridges and tunnels and a new state-of-the-art transportation system in New Jersey instead of Kandahar? Mr. President, our friends on the other side who believe that we should balance the budget by spending cuts alone are more than willing to bargain away student loans, bargain away prescription drug coverage, even bargain away nursing home care for the elderly parents to protect entitlements for big oil companies, billionaire corporate executives who travel the world in private jets, and millionaires who believe they are entitled to all of the tax loopholes they're getting now after the biggest tax cut in history, entitled to tax cuts but not obligated to create American jobs, contrary to the false rhetoric we hear from the other side about a correlation between entitlements for the wealthy and job creation. The hard right wing of the Republican Party has come to the table willing to give up nothing, unwilling to accept an offer by the President and Democrats of trillions of dollars in spending cuts, potential savings in entitlement programs, and tax reform options, all of which they have been demanding, unless we agree to protect to the entitlements that exist for the wealthy. Not even a single penny on the revenue side of the option. Don't touch those entitlements for the big 5 oil companies. Don't touch the entitlements for the corporate jets. Don't touch the entitlement for the racehorses. Don't touch any of those entitlements, giving the tax breaks and having a code where an incredible universe of corporations in America don't even pay at the end of the day by using all of the provisions of the code, anything towards the common good. They come to the table with nothing. They look America in the eye and tell us we cannot cut subsidies to big oil companies. We cannot put entitlements to the wealthy on the table because in their ideological haze, they conveniently, through this political sleight of hand, label any attempt to end those tax breaks, those entitlements, as a tax increase on what they like to call the job creators. And their excuse for such an irresponsible bargaining position? Trickle-down economics. I've heard this so many times over the time I've been here in Congress. But the problem is nothing has ever trickled down. And yet those same entitlements for the entitled, the $5 trillion entitlement the Bush tax cuts would cost going forward over the next decade, that we are told at the outset would create jobs, have turned to be the greatest failed jobs program in American history. And I look at how those tax breaks are skewed to the wealthiest. I understand the opportunity to help middle-class families, and I promote that because they're the ones who spend in this economy and create demands. But the way those tax cuts are skewed to the wealthiest, $5 trillion. I asked my friends, where are all the jobs that were supposedly going to be created as a result of that? Where are the jobs these Republican entitlements to the wealthy were supposed to produce? Where are they? When middle-class Americans are struggling to make ends meet, pay the bills, keep their jobs, their health care, their homes, entitlements to the entitled are the most reckless kind of spending. This is the irresponsible Republican entitlement spending that should be on the table, the very entitlement spending that contributed to our current debt. And yet our friends on the other side continue to protect these entitlements. You know, they will not vote to raise the debt limit unless we cut entitlements for the middle class, the working middle-class families of this country, but they protect entitlements for the wealthiest Americans. They're holding a gun to our heads at a critical time in our economic history. But we need only to look back at how often Republicans themselves have raised the debt limit. As you can see from this chart, to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy, George W. Bush had 7 increases of the debt ceiling, increasing it by 90% for the largest increase in history, a total of over $5 trillion. That includes the entitlements for the wealthy that they will not put on the table in the name of shared sacrifice, even if it means America defaults on its debt and becomes a deadbeat, and sends a ripple effect throughout the world and its economies that come back crashing on our shores here in the United States. So it's amazing to me. Ronald Reagan, he raised the debt ceiling 18 times. 18 times in 8 years. A total percentage increase of 199%, amounting to $1.8 trillion, which in today's dollars would be $4 trillion today. 18 times Ronald Reagan. 18 times. George Bush 7 times for $5.3 trillion. And that amount, by the way, under the Bush years, ends up being what? What is it equal to? The Bush tax cuts, $5 trillion. Now they will not raise the debt limit to protect the good faith of the American financial system, to protect middle-class families who have already lost so much under Republican economic policies that led us to the brink of economic disaster. The whole confluence of what happened in September 2008, where we had these Bush tax cuts totally unpaid for, denying the Federal Treasury those monies at a time in which we had 2 wars raging abroad in Iraq and Afghanistan, a new entitlement program unpaid for, and a marketplace that instead of being a free market, which I support, became a free-for-all market, in which investor decisions end up becoming collective risk to the entire country. And that's what we have been facing. Instead of meeting this responsibility, they favor cuts in entitlements to seniors, to the disabled, to families struggling to make ends meet, to students seeking to get the college education that can help fuel America's prosperity. That's what we saw in the House Republican budget that passed, but are willing to decimate our nation's economy to protect entitlements for the rich. They've dug in their heels and walled off irresponsible, unnecessary tax breaks for big oil companies. They've walled off entitlements to multi-billion-dollar corporations and millionaires who need no entitlements because they believe, blinded by their ideological haze, that the rich are entitled to their outrageous giveaways, even if it means ballooning the deficit and sending the nation into default on its debt. Entitlements for these special interests, cuts for everyone else. Mr. President, Republicans prefer to talk about cutting entitlements rather than what it really means, rather than cutting Social Security, rather than cutting Medicare, rather than cutting Medicaid, because cutting entitlements seems so much esoteric. It's not very personal. But we all know our families, our mothers and fathers who may be getting their health care on Medicare, or one of them who may be sitting in a nursing home on Medicaid, or a poor child who's getting their health care being taken care of on Medicaid. We know our friends and neighbors with disabilities, and we understand what those challenges are. Let's be clear. The only entitled people Republicans are talking about in this debate are those who already enjoy enormous benefits under the tax code, both individually and corporations, who feel entitled to these pretty outrageous tax breaks. Oil companies, as I heard from the executives who appeared before the Senate Finance Committee, they clearly feel entitled to $21 billion in subsidies. Millionaires and billionaires think they're entitled to the Bush tax cuts. Corporate titans think they're entitled to tax breaks for their private corporate jets. And Republicans think these are the only entitlements worth protecting. It's time to stop trying to balance the budget on the backs of seniors and middle-class working families in this country. It's time to stop protecting government handouts to the entitled class at the expense of the middle class, and telling America in good economic times that it stimulates the economy and in bad times that it's a job creation policy. The truth is it is neither. It is simply an entitlement program for an entitled small class of Americans who are not struggling to make ends meet or pay the mortgage or afford health care or find another minimum wage job to put food on the table. Mr. President, this stark contrast of wealth in the nation is in the numbers. The 400 wealthiest taxpayers, those who get the most out of Republican entitlements, had an average income in 2008 of $270 million, almost $300 million. That amounts to an hourly wage of about $31,000 an hour. Their average tax rate was about 18%. In contrast, the median New Jersey household earned about $64,777 the entire year, as opposed to just 2 hours. That equated to 2 hours for the richest 400 people, and yet they paid an average of 21.2%. They paid a higher percentage of less of their wages than those 400 top earners in the country. A first lieutenant at Fort Dix, New Jersey, earned about $52,000. He paid an average tax rate of 18.9%. So I ask, Mr. President, looking at these numbers, what should be on the table and what should not? The fact is we are offering solutions. We are simply asking for fairness and for our friends on the other side to bring something to the table other than a political ideology and an unrealistic ultimatum, all in order to protect an entitled class that needs no protections. I don't usually agree with the conservative columnist David Brooks, but as I have said on this floor before, I agree with him when he says, quote, "The members of this movement talk blandly of default and are willing to stain their nation's honor." Willing to stain their nation's honor. And I agree when he wrote that if the debt talks fail, independent voters will see Democrats as willing to compromise, but Republicans were not. Mr. President, though, this is not even about that. At the end of the day, this is about the nation. This is about our economy. This is about trying to get people back to work. This is about trying to ensure families can realize their hopes and dreams and aspirations. This is about the United States of America, a beacon of light to the rest of the world, the gold standard in terms of credit and meeting its obligations, continuing to be that gold standard and that beacon of light, or becoming a deadbeat in the world. Mr. President, I would go even further and say the American public will see right through these efforts to protect entitlements for a privileged class, while those Americans who struggle every day, who build the foundation of this America, the cuts go on their back. They come to the table with nothing other than an ideological fixation that prevents them from negotiating in good faith, prevents them from putting the interests of the country ahead of their narrow political interests. I see that, I've read some of the comments about this issue as it relates to, well, do we end up giving President Obama, the ability to get reelected or not? This is not about President Obama. This is about the United States of America. This is about our country. This is about being responsible at one of its most critical times. This is about getting the country back on track. It's about giving the private sector faith and confidence that we are not going to default on our debt, that we're going to meet our obligations. It's about telling investors in the world the United States is still a good place to invest in. And when those investments are made, jobs are created, people go to work, once again they have the dignity of work taking place, they are able to spend in the economy grows, that creates other jobs, other opportunities, and we move towards fulfillment once again of a great American opportunity. That's what this debate is all about. It's a debate about each and every one of us. And the sooner our friends realize that, it's not about a political equation. It's not about who wins and loses in a political context. It's about the nation. And if we can fix our attention to the needs of the nation, then I've got to believe that we can meet this challenge in a balanced way. Clearly, if Ronald Reagan raised the debt ceiling 18 times, and if George Bush raised it 7 times, then this time, the first time under President Obama that it needs to be raised, which is merely to pay the obligations we already have, I got to believe that responsible people will come forward and say yes, and do it in a way that isn't on the backs of middle-class working families. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
On behalf of Senator Leahy, I ask unanimous consent that his law clerk on his staff, Brendan Forbes, be granted floor privileges for the week of July 18, 2011.
Without objection.
With that, Mr. President, I observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
with.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous the consent to call up amendment number 553.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, for Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment numbered 553.
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, well, first, without objection, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.